Welcome back into the archives, weary traveller. Tonight you arrive before dawn, where the air smells faintly of wax, smoke, and yesterday's work. You step into a medieval candle workshop, a place built on patience, repetition, and the quiet understanding that darkness always returns. If you enjoy calm, slow-moving history like this, you can subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so the archives are always easy to find when your mind needs something steady to rest on. Now, as you settle in, let your thoughts slow and your breathing soften. Whether you are still awake or already drifting, you are welcome here. Tonight we observe the boring, necessary and quietly essential lives of medieval candle makers. Before dawn, the workshop is colder than it will ever be again for this day. You feel it immediately when the door opens. The air is still and heavy with yesterday's smells of wax and smoke that never quite leave. Something faintly animal has soaked into the wood like a stray and refuses to leave. The candle makers arrive before the light does, because the light depends on them. They know this even if they never say it out loud. They enter without urgency. No one rushes toward anything. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes cost time and material, which costs money, which costs sleep. Cloaks are hung in familiar places. Boots are set down carefully. Hands flex slowly as they warm themselves over yesterday's leftover embers. You stand near the doorway long enough to notice that the workshop feels prepared, even when it is quiet. The tables are scarred but clean enough. Buckets sit where they were left. Tools are arranged without symmetry, but with intention. There is nothing shiny or decorative. Everything in the workshop exists to be used again. The first light of the day does not come from the sun. It comes from a stub candle, short and uneven, saved for this exact moment. A flame flickers, steadies, and suddenly the room makes sense again. Shadows retreat to their usual corners. The candle makers lean in slightly, checking the wick, making sure it behaves. This small flame matters. If it smokes or gutters, the day starts wrong. You notice how comfortable they are with this dim, imperfect and temporary light. They work in this atmosphere without complaint. This is not gloomy to them, it is normal. Next, the fire is coaxed back to life, not forced, but encouraged, with a few scraps of wood, a careful breath, and a pause to listen. Fire does not like to be rushed. The candle makers know this and treat it accordingly. Too much heat too early, and the wax will scorch later. Too little and the morning drags into itself. The workshop warms slowly. Cold air pulls away from the walls. Breath becomes less visible. Sleeves are rolled up one at a time. The smell grows stronger as the fire awakens fully. It settles into your clothes almost immediately, like it has been waiting for you. Light rules everything here in the shop. Light decides when work begins and ends. Light determines how long people read, pray, cook, and walk without tripping over their own furniture. Candle makers understand this power without romanticizing it. They are not guardians of light. They are suppliers of it. They know how easily it burns away. Before any wax melts, the waiting begins, waiting for pots to warm evenly, waiting for yesterday's wax to soften without separating, waiting for hands to remember their roles. Candle making does not reward enthusiasm. It rewards daily, practiced patience. You watch them move through the space with a quiet familiarity that feels earned. They do not speak because speaking would add no value to the day's tasks. Each task unfolds in the same order it always has, with shutters adjusted, tables cleared, and buckets checked. Nothing surprising happens, and that is the goal. Outside, the town stirs slowly. Inside, the workshop has already committed to the day. The candle makers do not check the sky. There is no need. Their schedule is older than clocks and more reliable. You feel the weight of repetition settle in early. This work will not change by noon. It will not become more exciting after lunch. It will look the same at dusk as it does now, only warmer and louder with smell. The candle makers accept this without resentment. This is how survival works. You show up, you do the same things correctly. You leave nothing unfinished that will cause trouble tomorrow. By the time the sun finally pushes pale light through the shutters, the workshop is fully awake. Wax waits to be melted. Wicks wait to be twisted. The day stretches ahead, long and familiar. This is how the boring lives of medieval candle makers begin, not with ambition or inspiration, but with readiness. Darkness will return tonight. They are already working on it. Candle makers do not choose perfect materials. Perfect materials do not exist. What they work with depends on what the town discards, saves, or trades away. The supply chain begins in places most people would rather not think about, and candle makers think about them constantly. You trace the origins backward and find kitchens, butcher stalls, monasteries and farms. Animal fat arrives first, bundled in cloth that has seen better days. Some pieces are pale and manageable. Others are darker, heavier and carry a smell that makes clear how close they came to being useless. The candle makers inspect everything with quiet seriousness. They do not recoil, they assess. Fingers press into the fat to judge texture. Noses decide more than eyes ever could. They know immediately what can be saved and what will poison an entire batch if allowed near the fire. Beeswax arrives differently. It is cleaner, lighter. It smells faintly of flowers and effort. It usually comes from monasteries or landowners with hives tucked behind orchards. It costs more than most households can justify and is treated accordingly. Beeswax is weighed carefully and stored separately. It does not mingle with tallow until it absolutely must. You notice how little material is rejected outright. Most of it can be rendered again, filtered again, cleaned just enough to serve its purpose. Candle making is an art of salvage. In the candle maker's shop, waste is not a dramatic thing. It is rather expensive. Supplies can be inconsistent. Feast days bring abundance. Fasting days bring almost nothing. Winter changes everything. Animals are leaner. Transport slows. Fat becomes precious. Candle makers plan for this months ahead, stretching materials carefully without admitting that they are doing so. Relationships matter more than coins. A butcher who sets aside fat instead of throwing it away. A cook who remembers to skim properly. A beekeeper willing to trade wax for finished candles. These arrangements are not written down, but they are remembered. You see how the candle makers keep mental accounts of favors owed and repaid. A generous delivery today might mean priority candles tomorrow. A missed delivery is noted quietly. No confrontation, just adjustment. The materials are sorted methodically. Tallow in one place, wax in another, scraps in a third. Anything questionable is trimmed carefully. Anything truly ruined is set aside for fuel. Even failure has value. The smell grows stronger as the piles grow. Raw fat announces itself loudly. It reminds you where it came from. The candle makers barely react. They have trained their senses to detect problems, not discomfort. Preparation takes time. Fat is chopped into smaller pieces. Wax is broken down. Foreign matter is removed by hand. Hair, dirt, bone fragments. This is not glamorous work, and there are no expectations to the contrary. You begin to understand that candle making connects quietly to everything else. Harvests, feasts, weather, even politics. A poor year dims homes long before people realize why. By the time sorting is finished, the workshop looks fuller and heavier. There is definitely enough material for the day. Maybe enough for tomorrow, but not enough for the candle makers to relax. The candle makers pause. in a shared assessment without words. Then they return to the fire. Rendering awaits. Rendering is the process where candle making stops pretending to be gentle. This is the point where raw material either becomes useful or absolutely does not. You feel the shift immediately when the pots are set over the fire and the heat begins its slow, relentless work. The tallow goes in first, cut into uneven chunks that soften long before they melt. At the start, it looks almost manageable, pale, quiet. Then the fire does what it always does. Edges slump, surfaces shine. The fat loosens its shape and turns glossy in a way that feels slightly uncomfortable to watch. The smell deepens. What was once faint becomes present. It fills the workshop with a foul and menacing presence. You notice how closely the candle makers watch the pots, not the fire, the pots only. Fire is just a tool. The real story happens on the surface of the melting fat. Too much heat darkens it, locking in odors that no amount of filtering can remove. Too little heat leaves impurities suspended, creating candles that sputter and smoke later in someone's home. They skim constantly. Small, stubborn fragments rise to the surface. Dirt, blood residue, bits of sinew that refuse to disappear. Each one is lifted out carefully with a tool worn smooth from years of repetition. The motion never changes. Lift, inspect, discard, return. These are the acts of repetition that ensure the work is done properly. Rendering takes time. The hours stretch thin. You feel it in your legs and shoulders just standing nearby. The heat dries your throat. Sweat gathers under your clothing. Wax clings to skin and becomes part of the everyday work, whether or not the feeling is desirable. You notice that no one leaves the room while rendering is underway. This stage punishes distraction. A moment of inattention can scorch an entire batch. Scorched tallow smells forever. Customers remember that smell. Reputation suffers, and money disappears. Filtering follows melting, not because it is efficient, but because it is necessary. The liquid fat is poured through cloth stretched tight over waiting containers, sometimes once, often twice, sometimes more. Each pass improves the process slightly. Candle making never aims for perfection. It aims to produce a usable product, well-made and functional candles. The cloth darkens quickly. It is rinsed, wrung out, and reused until it cannot be trusted anymore. Even then, it might be used once more. Waste is treated like an accusation in the workshop. Everything must justify itself. Beeswax is handled differently. Gently, respectfully, it melts at lower heat, releasing a faint sweetness that briefly softens the room. Even so, it carries debris from the hive, bits of pollen, fragments of comb. The candle makers remove what they can and accept what remains. You see how mistakes are folded back into the process rather than discarded. A cloudy batch is filtered again. A questionable one is re-rendered slowly, carefully, and watched more closely the second time. Nothing is abandoned unless it truly threatens everything else. Rendering teaches humility. It corrects confidence quickly. A candle maker who trusts their judgment too much ends up redoing work they thought was finished. Experience teaches restraint better than ambition ever could. As the wax settles into its final state, the surface grows smoother, the smell steadies, the liquid thickens slightly. These signs matter. They tell the candle makers when to stop and when to wait longer. There is no written instruction for this, only memory and attention. By the time rendering finishes, the workshop feels heavier, not louder or more chaotic, just denser. The heat lingers, the smell presses close. The candle makers look older than they did at dawn, not exhausted but shaped by the work. The wax is covered and set aside, not because it is done, but because it is ready for the next stage. Rendering never feels complete. It feels accepted. you realize that this is the invisible labor behind every steady flame. People admire candles without understanding how much effort went into making them. The fire is adjusted again. Tools are set down carefully. Nothing spectacular happens within this process. Rendering is a necessary burden, not an achievement. Now the wax awaits. Wicks look harmless until you have to depend on them. They are simple strands of fibre twisted together, and somehow they decide whether all this work succeeds or quietly fails in someone else's home. You watch the candle makers sit for this part, not because it is easy, but because standing introduces movement that hands do not need. Wicks demand stillness. Any sway becomes inconsistency, and inconsistency becomes dripping, smoking, and customer dissatisfaction. The fibres are nothing special. Flax, hemp, linen scraps gathered and reused. New material is expensive, old material is serviceable. Everything is sorted by feel, too coarse and it burns too fast, too fine and it drowns in wax. Fingers decide before eyes do. Twisting begins slowly. Hands roll fibres together with a practiced pressure, not tight enough to choke the flame, not loose enough to fray. You notice how often they pause to adjust. Fingers slide along the length, correcting minor imperfections before they become problems. Wick making is apprentice work at first, endless repetition designed to teach patience rather than skill. Many mistakes remain invisible until the candle burns, which makes them more frustrating. The candle makers know this and watch closely. A wick twisted unevenly is undone and redone. No comment, no explanation, just a correction. Apprentices learn quickly that careless work only creates more work later. Length matters, thickness matters, purpose matters. Church candles require steadier, longer-burning wicks. Household candles tolerate more variation. Workshop candles barely qualify as candles at all and burn quickly by design. Once twisted, wicks are stretched and measured, trimmed carefully and bundled loosely. They hang to dry on racks that line the walls like unfinished lines of thought. Damp fibres absorb wax unevenly. That mistake reveals itself too late to fix. You feel the quiet concentration deepen again. Wick making demands focus without stimulation. It rewards calm attention and punishes distraction without warning. No one rushes. Rushing ruins wicks. Ruined wicks waste wax. Wasted wax costs money. The logic is simple and unforgiving. As the bundles grow, they are sorted by destination. Dipping wicks, moulding wicks, and repairing wicks. Each has its place. Nothing is labelled with words. Placement and memory do the work instead. Hands ache by the end of this stage. Fingers stiffen. Still, the work continues until it is done correctly. Stopping early only delays failure. By the time the last wick is hung, the workshop feels poised. Wax is rendered and wicks are prepared. Everything is ready for the long repetition ahead. The candle makers stand slowly, stretching backs that have bent over this work for years. There is no relief at this moment, only readiness, and now dipping awaits. This is where time stretches thin and patience is tested without mercy. Dipping is not difficult to understand. You lower a wick into wax, lift it out, allow it to cool and repeat. You could explain it to anyone in a few seconds. Doing it well for hours is something else entirely. You stand near the dipping frame as the prepared wicks are tied into place. Long rows hang straight, evenly spaced and waiting. They look almost hopeful, which is misleading. Wax does not reward hope, it rewards consistency. The rendered wax is reheated carefully, not fully liquid at first, just softened. Temperature matters more now than it has all day. Too hot and the wax slides off uselessly. Too cool and it clings in uneven lumps that never quite smooth out. The candle makers test the surface by sight and habit, not by touch. Experience has taught them better. The first dip changes almost nothing. A thin layer settles onto the fibers, barely visible. The candle makers expect this. Anyone who expects results immediately in this trade has not lasted long. The frame is lifted. Excess wax drips back into the pot. Every drop that returns is a small victory. Cooling takes place in silence, not stillness but waiting. The wax dulls from shine to matte. That shift matters. It tells the candle makers when the next dip will hold properly. The second dip thickens the candle slightly. The third begins to give it presence. Each pass adds weight and shape. Still, nothing feels finished. The repetition presses gently but firmly on your sense of time. You stop counting cycles. Counting only makes the work feel longer. You notice how spacing is adjusted as the candles grow. Early on, wicks can hang close together. Later, they must be separated carefully to prevent sticking. Wax does not forgive contact. Two candles brushing together can ruin both. Hours pass like this, with dipping, lifting, cooling, and repeating this process. The workshop grows warmer, the air thickens, wax builds on hands, on tools, on the floor beneath the frame. Drips harden quickly and are scraped up later. Nothing escapes reuse. Molded candles interrupt the rhythm slightly. Wax is poured slowly into prepared forms. Wicks centered with practiced accuracy. These candles are destined for places where appearance matters. Churches, wealthy homes. Spaces where smoke and dripping are noticed rather than tolerated. Molds introduce their own problems. Wax must cool evenly. Molds must be warmed enough to prevent cracking, but not enough to warp. Wicks must stay centered as the wax settles. You watch the candle makers hover nearby without touching, letting gravity and temperature do their work. There is a kind of quiet boredom that settles here, not a dullness, but a flattening. This work does not excite or surprise. It absorbs, it occupies, it demands attention without offering novelty in return. By late afternoon, finished candles begin to accumulate, some thick, some thin. Some are straight enough to be admired. Others are slightly imperfect but acceptable. Candle makers know exactly where the line sits between quality and wasted effort. They stop dipping when arms ache and mistakes begin to appear more often. Pushing beyond that point only creates work for tomorrow. Experience teaches when to stop better than any rule. The finished candles are set aside to cool completely. They hang or stand quietly, solidifying into tools that will briefly push darkness back. The most visible progress of the day sits in neat, unremarkable rows. This is the core of the trade, repetition without reward beyond completion. Light is built slowly, layer by layer, by people who understand that nothing about this process is fast. By the time candles take shape, the workshop smells exactly like what it is. There is no disguising it. Tallow carries its origin proudly, and once it has been heated all day, it settles into every surface with confidence. You notice the candle makers adjust shutters as evening approaches, not fully open, not fully closed. Ventilation is a constant negotiation. Too much airflow cools wax too quickly. Too little turns the workshop into something even they would rather avoid. The smell does not stop at the door. It drifts. Neighbors notice. Complaints arrive sooner or later, sometimes politely, sometimes with visible irritation. Candle makers listen without promising much. They have heard it all before. Workshops are placed carefully for this reason, on the edge of town, downwind when possible, near water where runoff and smell disperse more easily. This is not an accident or neglect. It is a careful consideration. You watch them scrape wax from tables and floors as they go. Small piles form, destined for melting again. Even cleanup serves production. Still, no amount of effort removes the smell completely. It lives in the wood, the stone, and the walls. Smoke management matters just as much. A poorly rendered candle smokes heavily, blackening walls and ceilings. Customers remember this. A single bad batch can undo months of steady work. Candle makers test and inspect with this in mind. They check wick placement, candle weight, and balance. These are subtle signs of how a candle will behave once lit. Experience replaces testing each one directly. Time has taught them what failure looks like before it happens. Tallow candles will always smell more than beeswax. Everyone knows this. Everyone also knows beeswax costs more. Most people tolerate tallow because the alternative is darkness. Complaints fade quickly once night arrives. As production slows, the workshop quiets. The fire is allowed to die back gradually. Pots are covered. Tools are set aside, but the smell remains heavy and familiar. Outside, dusk settles. The candle makers are surrounded by unlit candles as daylight fades. Soon they will light a few themselves to finish cleaning. The irony is constant and unremarkable. You feel the day shift toward completion. The hardest work is done. What remains is organization and preparation. Tomorrow's supplies, tomorrow's orders, tomorrow's darkness. The candle makers endure complaints because they understand something others forget. Light comes at a cost, and someone will always pay that cost. Apprentices do not arrive to learn candle making. They arrive to learn endurance. The craft comes later, after patience has been tested and found reliable. You see this immediately in the work they are given. No one hands them wax or wicks on the first day. They are handed brooms, scrapers, and buckets instead. Cleaning is not a punishment in the workshop. It is a lesson in patience and attention to detail. Wax hardens in corners and clings to surfaces with quiet determination. Removing it teaches a careful means of attention. Miss a spot, and it shows up later as a slip, a spill, or a ruined candle. Apprentices learn quickly that neglect always circles back. They arrive earlier than the candle makers, sometimes in the dark. Floors are swept before anyone else enters. Tools are checked and laid out exactly where they belong. Cloth filters are washed even though they never truly come clean. The smell settles into their clothes faster than they expect. When apprentices are finally allowed to handle materials, they start with the worst of it. Old tallow, scraps that smell wrong, fat that needs trimming and careful judgment. They learn what can be saved and what threatens everything around it. This knowledge cannot be hastened. It settles slowly into the senses. Mistakes are common and quietly corrected. A wick twisted unevenly is untwisted and redone. Wax overheated by an apprentice is cooled and rendered again, usually by the same hands that caused the problem. There are no speeches. Time teaches the lesson more effectively. Waste is treated seriously. Every spill is noted, every crooked candle accounted for. Apprentices learn that wasted wax is wasted effort, and wasted effort is not easily replaced. The workshop does not run on abundance. It runs on control. You watch how corrections happen without embarrassment. A hand is repositioned, a pot moved slightly, a bundle of wicks is retied. Instruction is constant but subtle. Apprentices who respond well stay. Those who resent repetition do not. Training takes years. Long enough for boredom to test commitment. Many leave before reaching competence. The work does not change to accommodate them, nor will it ever. Those who remain begin to anticipate problems. They skim pots without being told. They adjust fire before wax scorches. They recognize when something smells wrong before anyone else reacts. The trust grows quietly. By the time an apprentice is considered useful, they have learned more about restraint than skill. They know when to stop. They know when to redo work rather than push forward. They know that control prevents loss better than speed ever could. The workshop filters people the way cloth filters wax, slowly, steadily, and without drama. Only what belongs remains. Supplying candles is not a matter of selling. It is a matter of being remembered at the right moment. You see how candle makers organize their obligations with quiet care. Orders are not written down as much as they are carried in memory. Churches are the most predictable. Feast days require light. Services stretch longer in winter. Candles must burn steadily without smoke. A single failure is noticed immediately. Candle makers prepare these orders first and with extra attention. Household candles fill the gaps. Families tolerate imperfections as long as light appears when needed. Drips are cleaned, smoke is endured, and darkness is worse. Guild halls and workshops fall somewhere in between. They want reliability without luxury. Candle makers know exactly how much effort to invest in each order without overspending time or material. You watch candles being bundled carefully. Sizes are counted twice. Weight is checked by hand. Consistency matters. A church that receives uneven candles will remember this kind of mistake. Reputation travels quickly in small towns. Competition exists quietly. Another chandler across town. Another supplier from the next village. Prices remain similar. Quality determines survival. Candle makers mark their work subtly by length preferences and wick trimming styles. Small details replace branding. Customers recognize what works. Deliveries are timed carefully. Too early and candles warp. Too late and customers turn elsewhere. Balance is what matters. As orders leave the workshop, responsibility shifts. These candles will speak for their makers long after the fire is cold. The workshop returns to preparation. There are always more orders coming in. Another season is always approaching. Nothing in the shop is finished for long. Once the candles are made and the orders are prepared, the workshop does not relax. It shifts into a quieter phase of work that carries just as much weight. This is the part no customer ever sees, and few would think to ask about. Accounting here does not look like numbers on parchment. It looks like memory, habit, and cautious thinking about the future. You watch the candle makers move finished candles into storage. Shelves line the walls, raised just enough to avoid dampness and low enough to discourage warping. Candles are arranged with care, too close together, and they bend. Too far apart, and space is wasted. Everything is a compromise shaped by experience. Beeswax candles sit apart from the rest. Fewer in number, cleaner and more expensive. They are touched less often, moved more carefully, and checked more frequently. A damaged beeswax candle is a financial insult. A damaged tallow candle is an inconvenience. Both matter, but not equally. Rodents are a constant concern. Wax attracts teeth. Shelves are inspected, containers sealed. Any sign of gnawing triggers immediate rearrangement. Loss here happens quietly and spreads quickly if ignored. You notice how the candle makers pause often, scanning shelves and stacks without touching them. This is not indecision, it is an assessment. How much remains, how much must be produced before winter, and how thin margins feel today compared to last year. Accounting happens in the head and in the body. They remember how much wax arrived this week, how much fuel burned, how many candles sold, how many mistakes were melted back down. These calculations live in posture and tone rather than written records. Seasonal planning weighs heavily now. Winter stretches nights longer and demand is much higher. Summer brings slower sales but no fewer responsibilities. Feast days appear on the calendar whether preparation is complete or not. Candle makers think months ahead because falling behind means dim homes and lost trust. There is no surplus worth celebrating. Stability is success. Enough wax to meet orders, enough fuel to keep fires steady, enough reputation to be remembered when darkness falls. You feel the quiet pressure of responsibility settle again. This trade does not allow indulgence. Every decision has weight. Every delay compounds. Tools are checked and set in place. Pots cleaned while still warm. Cloth filters are hung to dry, even though they will never fully recover. Everything returns to its position because searching for tools will waste time tomorrow. The workshop grows still as these thoughts conclude. Nothing more can be done tonight that will improve the outcome. Pushing further only creates errors. Experience teaches restraint better than ambition can. As the final candle is placed on its shelf, the day feels accounted for. Nothing extraordinary was achieved. That is exactly what keeps the business alive. Dusk arrives quietly, as always. The workshop notices before anyone else because light is its currency. Shadows stretch across the floor. The remaining daylight slips through shutters at a lower angle. The candle makers do not look surprised. This is expected. One candle is lit to finish the final tasks. Its flame is steady, familiar, reassuring in its predictability. The wick behaves. The wax melts evenly. This small success carries more satisfaction than anything else. Shutters are closed carefully, not sealed tight, but just enough to keep out the night air and wandering eyes. The fire is reduced to embers and left warm enough to prevent wax from cracking as it cools. Too much heat will create problems the next day. Hands are washed. The smell remains as always. Candle makers carry it home with them, into their clothes, into the places where they sleep. It is part of the trade, like sore fingers and stiff backs. You step back and take in the workshop at rest. Rows of candles wait quietly, each holding a brief promise. The light in this shop is temporary by design. It burns, it fades, and it must be replaced. The people who manufacture this light understand this better than anyone. The day ends with no special actions, no celebrations, and no frustrations, just completion. Candle making does not offer closure, it offers continuity. As the candle is snuffed, darkness returns to the workshop. Tomorrow the same stub will be lit again, the same wax reheated, the same wicks will be prepared. Nothing will change, and that reliability will keep the town lit for many nights to come. You leave knowing that when darkness falls elsewhere, products made in this candle shop will answer it, quietly, briefly, and adequately. And for the medieval candle makers, that has always been more than enough. And so, traveller, we leave the candle makers as the light fades from the workshop. The fires cool, the wax hardens, and the day ends, not with satisfaction, but with readiness. Tomorrow will bring the same tasks, the same smells, and the same quiet responsibility of keeping darkness manageable for one more night. If you are somehow still awake, you have the patience of a well-trimmed wick. If you drifted off somewhere between the dipping frames and the cooling shelves, that is exactly what the archives are for. If you would like to return for more sleep-inducing history, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so the archives are always easy to find when your mind needs something calm and steady to fall asleep to. Until next time, may your nights be softly lit and your rest come easily. Good night, traveller.